Imagine standing at your cousin's engagement party alone while your entire family laughs behind your back, whispering that your fiancé probably doesn't even exist. I'm Emma, and for years I lived with their doubts and their sideways glances. But that day, right when the jokes got the loudest, a private jet descended onto the lawn, and out stepped the man they said I had made up. Have you ever had a moment where you finally proved everyone wrong without even saying a word? I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below. In my family, futures weren't dreamed. They were pre-drafted and laminated before you even hit puberty. You didn't have to wonder what your life would look like. It was spelled out in conversations over pot roast and lemon pie, in the subtle glances across a crowded table when someone dared to stray. It was a Sunday like so many before. The house smelled of slow-cooked roast beef and warm bread, with lemon pie cooling by the window. Aunt Martha and Uncle Ron were already settled on the patio, sipping sweet tea and sharing gossip about neighbors we barely knew. My mother, Linda, floated between the kitchen and the dining room, her apron crisp, her smile tighter than necessary. Dad, Thomas, manned the grill outside even though it wasn't needed, a beer in one hand, the weight of expectation in the other. I sat at the edge of the living room, pretending to flip through a photo album. Wedding after wedding, graduation after graduation, each smiling face a milestone approved by the Carter Family Council. Get a degree, find a stable job, marry by 30, stay within driving distance of home, rinse and repeat, the unspoken blueprint. My cousin Olivia slid into the seat next to me. She gave me a small nudge with her elbow, her eyes flickering toward the kitchen where my mother was orchestrating the afternoon like a general before battle. Olivia never said much at these gatherings, but her silence always felt like solidarity. I smiled, grateful for the quiet understanding. Dinner was called soon after, and we gathered around the long oak table, passing plates and dodging loaded questions. I knew the topic would find me eventually. It always did. Like clockwork, between the green bean casserole and the mashed potatoes, my mother leaned in slightly, her voice sweet as honey but sharp underneath. "So, Emma," she said, buttering a roll with mechanical precision, "any special young man you might be bringing home soon?" The question hung in the air, as inevitable as it was exhausting. A few heads turned, subtle but unmistakable. Aunt Martha raised her eyebrows. Uncle Ron coughed into his napkin, smirking. I smiled politely, the kind of smile you wear when you're shrinking on the inside. "Not at the moment, Mom. Just focusing on school right now." Linda tutted softly, a sound barely louder than the clink of cutlery but carrying the weight of disappointment. "Well, don't wait too long, sweetheart. Good men don't just fall out of the sky, you know." The table chuckled lightly, and I felt my cheeks flush, though not from embarrassment. It was a slow-burning kind of anger, the kind you learn to swallow before it ever reaches your lips. I excused myself shortly after, claiming homework. No one objected. Maybe they figured I'd already drifted too far. I stood on the front porch for a while, letting the humid Texas air press against my skin, the cicadas buzzing their endless chorus. The neighborhood stretched out before me, rows of carefully mowed lawns, American flags fluttering from porches, minivans parked neatly in driveways. Predictable, safe, suffocating. I thought about the blueprint again, the laminated life plan my family carried around like gospel. College degree, office job, house with a porch swing, husband, 2 kids. Not a bad life, but it wasn't mine. I didn't know yet what life I wanted, but deep down I knew I couldn't spend it coloring inside their pre-drawn lines. Olivia came out after a few minutes, standing beside me without speaking. She didn't have to. In the fading light, I found a small kind of courage in her quiet company. When I finally got into my car, the air inside was still warm, heavy with the scent of leather and dust. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. "This life isn't mine to live," I whispered, the words foreign and yet freeing as they left my mouth. I didn't know what breaking free would look like yet. I didn't know how far I'd have to go, how many cold silences I would endure, how many times I'd question if I made the right choice. But even then, I felt it, deep, undeniable, the first crack in the blueprint, and I had no idea yet how much breaking free would cost, or how sweet it would taste. The first real decision I made for myself felt like a betrayal to everyone who loved me. It didn't start with some grand announcement. No fireworks, no slam doors. It was quieter than that, like the way a tree starts leaning before it finally falls. The University of Texas at Austin had a way of breathing color into you. The bright murals downtown, the smell of food trucks peppering the air, students rushing past with portfolios instead of briefcases. It was a different rhythm from home, a beat that didn't ask permission before pulling you along. I had signed up for an elective on a whim, Introduction to Interior Spaces, thinking it would be an easy A. But somewhere between the talks on light, color theory, and the feeling of a room shaping emotions, something inside me woke up. It was like someone had cracked open a window in a stuffy attic I hadn't realized I was trapped in. One afternoon, as I arranged swatches of fabric across a project board, a professor named Miss Caro leaned over my shoulder. She tapped the edge of my design gently and said, "You see beyond the furniture, Emma. You see feeling." Her words stayed with me longer than any business seminar ever had. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, flipping my phone in my hand, heart pounding. My finance major sat heavy in my mind, a silent witness to all the expectations piled on my back, but my fingers dialed the number anyway. "Hi, Mom," I said when she answered. "Hi, sweetheart. Everything okay?" Her voice was bright, expectant. I hesitated. I think I want to change my major." There was a pause, long enough that I almost wondered if the call had dropped. "Change?" she repeated. "To what?" "Interior design," I said, forcing the words out before I lost my nerve. On the other end, silence again. Then the soft, sharp sigh of disappointment. "Emma, that's not a real career. That's a hobby." I heard Dad's voice in the background, low and unreadable. "Tell her she's throwing away a solid future," he said, not bothering to take the phone. I don't remember much else of that conversation, just the heavy, invisible door that clicked shut between us. When we hung up, the room felt colder, even though it was still a muggy Texas night. The next months blurred by. I filled out transfer forms, picked new courses, and swallowed the ache every time my phone buzzed with a text that wasn't from them. I didn't dare mention it again. There were no more care packages, no more weekend check-ins, just silence, loud and bitter. But in that silence, I found space to think. When an unpaid internship popped up at a boutique design firm in Chicago, I didn't even hesitate. I packed 2 suitcases, bought a one-way ticket, and left everything safe and expected behind. Chicago greeted me with a slap of cold air that smelled of asphalt and ambition. My new home was a 4th-floor walk-up with peeling paint and windows that moaned when the wind blew. The radiator rattled more than it heated. I could hear my neighbor practicing saxophone at all hours. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I spent my first night there putting together a bed from IKEA, the cheap kind that comes with one Allen wrench and a manual written in stick figures. I wrestled with the pieces, my hands red from the effort, laughter bubbling up despite the ache in my arms. As I dropped onto the thin mattress, exhausted, I caught sight of my reflection in the frosted window. No diploma yet, no 6-figure offer letters. No shiny fiancé lined up like they'd always pictured. Just me, alone. And for the first time, entirely mine. Outside, the first real winter wind howled against the glass. It rattled the window pane and crept under the door, cold and sharp and new. It wasn't comforting. It wasn't easy. But it was honest. It was alive. If freedom was supposed to feel this terrifying, I was ready to be scared every day. I wasn't looking for love. I was just trying not to drown. Chicago had a way of swallowing you whole if you didn't swim fast enough. Between the long hours at my internship, the endless side projects to pay rent, and the cold that sliced through even the thickest jackets, I barely had room to breathe, let alone daydream about romance. The rooftop mixer was an accident. My friend Josie from the office had dragged me there, insisting that networking was as important as talent. I hadn't wanted to go, but something about the soft jazz in the background, the twinkling fairy lights strung above, and the way the city skyline stretched wide and endless made me stay a little longer than planned. I was nursing a glass of cheap white wine, pretending to check emails on my phone when someone stepped into my peripheral vision. "Bad date?" a warm voice asked. I looked up and saw him, casual in a dark jacket and jeans, holding a ginger ale instead of a drink. His hair was slightly tousled from the wind, and there was something grounded about the way he stood, hands tucked loosely into his pockets. "No," I said, smiling despite myself. "Just bad networking." He laughed, easy and genuine, the sound somehow making the cold night feel warmer. "I'm Nathan," he said, offering his hand. "Professional wallflower." "Emma?" I replied, shaking it. We didn't talk about resumes or who we knew. We talked about travel, about why Chicago pizza is both brilliant and overrated, about the ridiculous ways people justify staying in jobs they hate. His stories were filled with cities I'd only seen on postcards: Singapore, Abu Dhabi, Sydney, and yet he spoke about them with the kind of familiarity you reserve for your childhood bedroom. Later, he told me he worked as an aviation consultant, helping major airports modernize their terminals. It sounded glamorous, almost suspiciously so, but nothing in his demeanor asked for applause. He was grounded in a way that people who are always moving sometimes are. After that night, it became a slow, quiet unfolding. Long walks along the river when the city lights shimmered like broken glass. Late-night talks over greasy burgers and black coffee at diners that never closed. Sundays spent browsing used bookstores where the floorboards creaked and the hours slipped away unnoticed. I didn't plan to tell my family right away. Part of me wanted to keep Nathan like a secret painting I wasn't ready to hang in a public gallery. But Thanksgiving rolled around and traditions demanded updates. I mentioned Nathan casually over the phone, like someone mentioning a new brand of coffee they were trying. "You met someone?" my mother asked, voice sharp with barely hidden surprise. "Yeah," I said. "His name's Nathan. He's wonderful." There was a beat of silence, and then the usual parade of questions marched in. What did he do? Was he American? Did he have plans to settle down soon? When I said he traveled a lot for work, I could practically hear the raised eyebrows through the phone. "Sounds like a fantasy," Aunt Martha later joked at a family gathering when my name came up. Maybe she found him on a stock photo website. You know those guys who always look perfect because they're not real? The table erupted in laughter. I stood in the kitchen doorway unnoticed, holding a tray of deviled eggs that suddenly felt too heavy. I told myself not to care. I told myself that words couldn't change what was real. But the sting settled under my skin anyway, a slow burn that didn't fade. Nathan wasn't a fantasy. He was more real than any of the polished men my family had ever paraded in front of me. Boys with shiny degrees and empty eyes. Fine, I thought, setting the tray down a little harder than necessary. Let them laugh now. They won't be laughing forever. Nothing invites judgment faster than daring to live a life no one else imagined for you. I realized that as soon as I opened the heavy, cream-colored envelope sitting on my kitchen counter. The invitation was thick, formal, smelling faintly of some expensive floral perfume. Madison and Kyle were getting engaged, and the Carter family expected nothing less than a full showing. My studio apartment in Chicago was a far cry from the sprawling houses back home. The walls were lined with fabric samples and half-finished mood boards for my clients. A stack of design magazines teetered precariously on the coffee table, and a half-drunk coffee sat cooling next to my laptop. I held the invitation between my fingers, rereading it even though the words hadn't changed. Madison, the golden child, following the golden plan, stable career, dentist fiancé, suburban dream. My phone buzzed sharply against the table. Group chat, Carter family, events. I stared at it for a second before opening the thread. Aunt Martha, can't wait to see everyone, especially new additions to the family. Uncle Ron, hope Emma's imaginary boyfriend can make it. Cousin Luke, maybe he'll parachute in. The laughing emojis dotted the thread like confetti at a cruel parade. I set the phone down carefully, as if it might burn through the table if I held it any longer. The familiar wave of anger rose in my chest, but I didn't let it crash over me this time. I sat with it. I let it settle. Nathan walked in a few minutes later, still carrying the chill of the March evening on his jacket. He noticed my face immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down a paper bag of takeout on the counter. I pushed the invitation across the table. He read it, then glanced at my phone, still lighting up with more sarcastic messages. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he smiled. Not the forced, polite kind, but the kind that knows storms are coming and decides to sail anyway. "Let's go," he said simply. I blinked. "What?" He pulled 2 plates from the cabinet, setting them down with a soft clatter. "Let's go to the engagement party. Let's show them the life you built and who you built it with." The simplicity of it stunned me. He wasn't offering to rescue me. He wasn't planning to defend me in some dramatic family showdown. He was just standing next to me, steady as a lighthouse. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Are you sure?" I asked. Nathan shrugged, opening the takeout containers. The smell of sesame chicken and fried rice filled the small kitchen. "You didn't build all this," he said, motioning around the apartment, "to hide from people who can't see past their own ideas." I nodded slowly. Maybe freedom wasn't about running. Maybe it was about standing still when everything in you wanted to flee. I grabbed a pen from the counter. RSVP, accepts with pleasure. I paused at the line for the number of guests, 2. I wrote it deliberately, pressing the ink into the thick paper. The next morning, I walked to the nearest mailbox, the wind biting at my cheeks. The city was slowly waking up, delivery trucks humming down side streets, dogs tugging impatient owners toward the nearest park. I stood in front of the blue metal mailbox, invitation in hand. I hesitated for just a second, feeling the weight of it all, the years of trying to fit, the ache of not being enough, the small voice still whispering, maybe it would be easier to stay quiet. Then I slid the envelope in and heard the solid thunk as it dropped inside. It wasn't just an RSVP, it was a battle flag. Some arrivals make more noise in the silence they leave behind. The sun was kind that afternoon, casting everything in a golden haze. The garden resort outside Austin shimmered under the late summer sky. Tables dressed in white linen lined the manicured lawn, each adorned with pale pink roses and tall glasses of champagne that caught the light like small fires. I arrived alone, as expected. Heads turned almost immediately, though not for the reason anyone hoped. Whispers stirred like leaves across the lawn. I caught the glint of Aunt Martha's bracelet as she nudged Uncle Ron, a smirk passing between them. "Emma's here," someone said, not bothering to lower their voice. "Wonder if her boyfriend got lost on the way from Fantasyland." I smoothed the front of my dress, a soft blue shift, simple and unassuming, and walked toward the reception area without pausing. I had learned long ago that hesitation only fed the wolves. Inside the reception tent, waiters floated by with trays of mini quiches and shrimp cocktail. A jazz band played under a canopy of twinkling fairy lights. The smell of grilling steak wafted from the outdoor kitchen, mingling with the heavy perfume of late summer roses. Madison, glowing and gracious, was posing for photos with Kyle, her fiancé. They made a handsome pair, the kind that fit neatly into the Carter family's silent checklist. As I accepted a flute of champagne from a passing server, my mother materialized beside me. "You're looking lovely, dear," she said, the compliment sliding through gritted teeth. "Thank you, Mom." I replied evenly. There was a pause, waited and waiting. You know, she continued lightly, it would be nice for you to say a few words later, as the eldest cousin. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a summons. I nodded, not because I wanted to, but because refusal would only fuel the murmurs already rising around me. The wait felt endless. Guests mingled, laughter rising in waves. Every so often I caught glances thrown my way, quick, assessing, pitying. The band slowed into a softer tune, and the MC tapped the microphone gently. We'd love to invite any family members to share a few words for Madison and Kyle. Linda's hand found my elbow, nudging with an urgency that belied her serene expression. I made my way to the front, the air thick with expectation. I took the microphone, feeling its coolness anchor me. Around me, champagne glasses stilled. Forks paused mid-air. I smiled, steady and small. Madison, I began, my voice clear against the lazy hum of the jazz. It's a beautiful thing to be seen, to be understood, and to be celebrated for exactly who you are. Not everyone gets that gift. If you do, hold on to it tight. A smattering of polite claps followed, more out of obligation than emotion. I stepped down, handing the mic back to the MC, and then the low hum started faint, almost mistaken for distant thunder. Heads turned upward. Conversations faltered. Glasses were set down. Over the distant tree line, sleek and silver, a private jet cut through the blue sky. It circled once, then began a slow descent toward the helipad just beyond the maple grove. The garden froze. Even the jazz band faltered, their melody drifting into awkward silence. I stood rooted, the breeze lifting the hem of my dress, tugging at loose strands of my hair. The jet touched down with a muted roar, sending a light spray of dust into the late afternoon air. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the cabin door opened, and Nathan Brooks stepped into the golden light. He wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored to a precision that didn't scream wealth, but whispered confidence. In one hand, he carried a small velvet box. His other hand shielded his eyes from the sun as he scanned the crowd. And when he found me, his whole face softened. Without hesitation, he crossed the lawn, the crowd parting instinctively before him. The scent of grilling steak, fresh roses, and sun-warmed grass wrapped around us as he reached me. Nathan leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to my temple, his hand resting lightly on my waist. "Sorry I'm late," he said, voice low and easy. "Traffic at 30,000 feet. The entire garden held its breath. Forks frozen mid-air, champagne halfway to lips, conversations cut mid-sentence. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. Nathan handed me the small velvet box without fanfare. Inside was a delicate bracelet, a single sapphire glinting in the sunlight. Simple, understated, beautiful. No grand speeches, no dramatic declarations, just a man standing exactly where he said he would be, exactly when it mattered most. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother lower her champagne glass slowly, her fingers trembling just slightly. Aunt Martha's mouth opened, then snapped shut without a sound. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one who had to explain myself. You can deny words, you can deny rumors, but it's hard to deny someone standing 2 feet away, smiling back at you. Twilight had begun to settle over the garden, folding the day into a softer, gentler shape. The fairy lights strung across the tent glowed warmer now, casting golden halos around the guests as the air turned cooler, and the buzz of conversation mellowed into a low, steady hum. Nathan stood beside me, his presence easy and unforced, chatting with a small group of aunts and uncles who, hours earlier, wouldn't have trusted he existed. Now they leaned in eagerly, asking about his work, his travels, what it was like to live between time zones and continents. Curiosity masked as politeness. Skepticism softened into interest. It wasn't a full acceptance, but it was a start. I watched as Aunt Martha adjusted her pearl necklace and laughed a little too loudly at one of Nathan's jokes. Uncle Ron clapped him on the back, a little harder than necessary, as if trying to test the firmness of his reality. My mother approached next, her steps measured, her smile stretched thin but present. "Will you be around for Thanksgiving?" she asked Nathan, her tone somewhere between jest and genuine hope. "If you're not too busy jet-setting, of course," she added, the edge of sarcasm blunted now. Nathan smiled warmly, unbothered. "I'd love to," he said, "if Emma doesn't mind sharing me." I chuckled quietly. "We'll make room." Beside her, my father cleared his throat, shifting his weight from one polished shoe to the other. Without much fanfare, he extended his hand to Nathan. "Welcome to the family," he said, his voice low, gruff. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't warm, but it was real. And in the Carter family, that counted for more than most people realized. I didn't feel the surge of triumph I once imagined I would. No sharp-edged satisfaction, no inward shouting of, "See, I told you?" Instead, there was a calmness, deep and grounding, like standing on the shore after a storm and realizing the sea would always move with or without your approval. I caught Olivia's eye across the lawn. She gave me a small wink, raising her champagne glass in a private toast no one else noticed. I smiled back, a silent thank you. Nathan drifted into conversation with a few of my younger cousins, recounting some ridiculous travel mishap involving a delayed flight and a camel, judging by the bursts of laughter. I stood a little apart, hands folded loosely in front of me, just watching, and somewhere deep inside, I understood something I hadn't before. I didn't need them to love Nathan to validate my choice. I didn't need them to love my life for it to be real. Because somewhere along the way, without fanfare, I had already given myself permission to be happy. Nathan caught my eye across the crowd, his smile quiet and steady. I smiled back, feeling none of the old urgency to prove anything to anyone. Maybe love wasn't about being understood right away. Maybe it was about being seen, eventually. The stars were beginning to blink into view as the last of the sunlight surrendered. I tilted my head back, breathing in the cool evening air, letting it fill all the spaces where old doubts used to live. The laughter, the music, the distant clinking of glasses, all of it blurred into a soft background hum. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't reaching for anything. I wasn't running from anything. I was simply standing where I was meant to be, and it felt like enough. As the evening air wrapped around me and the stars blinked awake above the garden, I realized something simple but powerful. I didn't have to win anyone over to live the life I chose. Sometimes, the people we love need time to see us for who we truly are. And that's okay. In life, patience and quiet strength often build bridges where anger never could. If this story touched a memory or feeling in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share your reflections or simply sit with them a while. Thank you for walking this journey with me.